Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today we are going to be reviewing Mooncat's first collection of the year called Baroquen. This is a pretty large collection featuring 8 polishes, mainly in these lustrous shimmer type of finishes, but we do also have a magnetic flaky polish, a glow-in-the-dark shimmer, and a metallic flake topper. So I definitely have some thoughts on these and I will save those for the end after comparisons. For now, let's just get into the swatches. The first polish in the collection is Fleur Sauvage, which is described as a light orange filled with chromy pink shimmer that shifts to orange and gold in extreme angles. So it might be kind of hard to tell, but this has like a slightly jelly-ish sort of base, but it is absolutely packed with this shimmer particle where it's kind of on the larger particle size. So it gives it a slightly different look visually compared to other Mooncat shimmers. But I got pretty much full coverage on 2 coats. I feel like if you look really closely, you might be able to see some nail line, but there's just so much shimmer that it's really distracting. I'm not sure if I love this color though. Next up we have the Stolen Kiss, which is a lilac pink lacquer filled with chromy color shifting shimmer that goes from yellow to green to blue. This basically had the same fluid formula as the last polish where it was super easy to apply and it had decent coverage when it comes to the evenness. Obviously it is going to be a bit sheer, especially because it's a little bit of a lighter color, so I would recommend doing 2 or maybe potentially 3 coats depending on your preference. Again, I just stopped at 2 because I feel like in most angles of light, it looked full coverage. I feel like the chromy shimmers in these really give the polishes this almost wet look, which I think is kind of fun. But sadly, I wasn't really able to capture the green to aqua color shift in the shimmer, at least not on camera. It looked really pretty in real life. Next we have Love's Labyrinth, which is a light sage green linear holographic. This has another super smooth formula. It wasn't too thick for being a linear holo, but it is a little bit creamier, maybe especially compared to the shimmers in the collection. This had really nice coverage on the first coat alone. It's just a little bit sheer, so I still would recommend doing 2 coats for full opacity. The holo flare in this one is really strong too, especially under just kind of desk lighting, which I really appreciate, and I love the soft sage green color so much. I think this actually is my top favorite from the collection. Next up we have La Petite Mort, which is a light blue magnetic filled with holo shimmer and micro glitters, as well as these rainbow iridescent flakies and a silver magnetic pigment. I honestly had a hard time telling what the base color was in this. Like, I thought it was a little bit gray at first, but just really packed with this super intense blue shimmer. This is such an ethereal, whimsical kind of shade, and it had a really flawless formula that magnetized really easily as well. I got it opaque in 2 coats, or at least opaque enough for me, because I feel like in very extreme angles of light you can see through to my nail line a little bit, but it just wasn't enough to do a 3rd coat for me. And of course I am also going to be showing the velvet effect with these. I like to hold the magnet next to my nail as I'm painting my coat, and then I pull the magnet away from my nail to sort of move the magnetic shimmer around. So here is 2 coats with no effect on the left and with the velvet effect on the right. It's definitely a very light and whimsical kind of shade. The next polish is Banquet of Breadcrumbs, which is described as a bright yellow-green filled with chromy yellow-green shimmer that even shifts to blue in extreme angles. So this basically had the same shimmer formula as the first 2 polishes in the collection, but I found that this one was a tiny bit more sheer. Like, maybe I just did a thinner coat than I normally do, but I feel like the first coat, it was really hard to see any of the base color. You just saw a lot of the shimmer. So while the second coat did build up pretty nicely, I feel like you can just see through to my nail a little bit more than with the other polishes, so I ended up doing a 3rd coat for this shade. It definitely intensified the color a little bit more too, giving it a little bit more of that lime green sort of color. Otherwise, it's just a little bit too chartreusey for me, so I didn't end up loving it as much as I thought that I would. The next shade is Castle of Cobwebs, which is a slate gray glow-in-the-dark lacquer filled with blue shimmer. So the formula on this one felt a little bit more like a Crelly, where you can see it's pretty pigmented but still a touch sheer on the first coat. I think I would say that the formula on this was a smidge thicker than the others, so I got it opaque enough for me on 2 coats, but I could see it being a little bit squishy, so if you do prefer doing thinner coats, you might need a third one for this. But either way, it's still self-leveled really beautifully and built up nicely. It just has this subtle kind of blue glow against that gray Crelly base, but like their other glow-in-the-dark shades, this one glows green, and I kind of wish it glowed blue instead to match the shimmer. While the glow was even and smooth, which I really appreciate, I did notice that this was a little bit weaker than some of their other glow-in-the-dark shades. Up next we have Such Sweet Sorrow, which is this blue-purple base filled with a purple to pink shifting shimmer that also shifts to yellow in extreme angles. So this one, for some reason, wasn't described as having the same chromy shimmers as the others in the collection, but visually it looks like the others, just in a different colorway. Either way, this one was pretty much the same as those other shimmers, where it was a little bit sheer on the first coat, but it built up nicely on 2 coats. There's a little bit of squishiness where if you look close enough or under very harsh or extreme lighting angles, you can make out your nail line, but I personally think there's just so much shimmer and shine that you wouldn't really need a third coat, but that's just me. And rounding out the collection, we have Hall of Mirrors, which is a silver flake metallic topper. So I thought it was interesting that this was only described as being silver, because I feel like this has an almost pewter color to it. It's not like the bright whitened silver, which you'll see later on in comparisons. So I thought color-wise it was unique and it fits the theme really well, but I feel like this only looks best over black or other darker colors. I personally don't love how it looks over white or even just the rest of the collection, to be honest, because I feel like those metallic flakies just give it this darker look and you only see flashes or glints of silver when the light catches it just right. But other than that, it just kind of adds this like extra visual texture that I personally am not the biggest fan of. So while I do think it is like a nice topper, I just personally don't love that I can't really use it with the rest of the collection. And lastly, here are my full hand swatches of the collection. I'm wearing 2 coats of each in bright, indirect, or overcast lighting. I unfortunately didn't have direct sunlight when I was swatching these, but I feel like coverage-wise, they looked really, really good, where I could barely see visible nail line. So I definitely think they're passable on 2 coats, but that obviously is just personal preference. And here they are in lower lighting, where I feel like those chromy shimmers really shine and glow, but so do the flakies in the magnetic and the topper. Getting into comparisons, we're starting with Fleur Sauvage and looking at it next to Stolen Ambrosia, which is unfortunately no longer with us. That one is your typical shimmer kind of formula, so it's much smoother, but even still, it's also deeper and a little bit brighter in color. So I did also want to show this next to Molten Lava, which sadly is another dearly departed shade. Even though that one is more similar in color to Stolen Ambrosia, I thought the finish was a little bit more similar to this like chromy shimmer, because Molten Lava is this ultra fine flaky kind of finish, so it has this flaky particle. It's definitely not the exact same finish, but visually, you know, from far away, they kind of look similar, although they are different colors, so I wouldn't call them dupes. The only other close shades in my collection are ILNP's On Location, which is this kind of bright coral shimmer with this hollow sparkle, and Holotaco's Encryption Key, which is one of their light multi-chromes that is basically another corally shimmer kind of polish. Both this and the ILNP are just a little bit deeper and more saturated. You can see how muted and pastel Fleur Sauvage is, so no dupes here. Next, for the Stolen Kiss, here it is next to A Midsummer's Dream, which is their other pink with a blue shimmer. This one obviously has a much brighter cotton candy pink and that finer blue shimmer formula, so definitely not a dupe. Here it is next to Moonfairy, which is more of like a true light lavender kind of color. It doesn't really have that much pink in it, and it also has a ton of these rainbow iridescent flakies. I think the closer shade is High Fructose, which is another Dearly Departed. This has a little bit more of like an orchid pink base color, but I feel like the shimmer color looked pretty similar. And lastly, I also wanted to see this next to Robotica, which is a linear holographic and not a shimmer, but it's another kind of pink base with like a blue sort of shimmer, so I thought it sort of fit in here too. So here is 2 coats of each, and you can definitely see, like, you know, they're all in the same kind of family. I want to say the Stolen Kiss is almost like an in-between of these 2 shades, but yeah, I definitely wouldn't call them dupes. I did also want to show this next to a couple of ILNP shades like Flower Child from last year's spring collection. That one's a similar base color but with a really intense blue shimmer. I actually think the closest ILNP shade was Opal Sunset, which has this peachy pink base color but a more similar golden shimmer. So again, I'm wearing 2 coats of each here, and you can definitely tell Flower Child does not really fit in. Aside from the blue shimmer, it also just has like a more lilac base color. I wouldn't say the Stolen Kiss and Opal Sunset are exact dupes. I think ILNP is a little bit warmer, but they're kind of similar. Next, for Love's Labyrinth, we of course are looking at it next to Devil's Ivy, which is the sage green magnetic from the Seasons of Persephone collection. That one doesn't have any holographic effect, but the base color is definitely kind of similar. And I did also want to see this next to Sagebrush, which definitely does not look like it would belong because it's so dark here, but it is a thermal and the warmer color is much lighter. I wouldn't call it an exact match though. I think Devil's Ivy is a little bit closer, but Love's Labyrinth is definitely the lightest. When it comes to other sagey or mint green holographics, I also have to show this next to Holo Taco's Mint Mojito, which is their minty holographic polish, as well as ILNP's Princeton, which is their pastel sage kind of linear holo. So I thought that Princeton was going to be closer to Love's Labyrinth, but seeing them on the nail, they don't exactly compare. I mean, Princeton definitely has the weakest holographic effect out of the 3, but arguably the most vibrant kind of sage green color while still being pastel, if that makes sense. Love's Labyrinth is just even lighter. Moving on to La Petite Mort, here it is next to Moonjelly, which is from the Mermaid Tales collection. That one is a white jelly filled base with this blue iridescent shimmer and blue iridescent flakies, but it just does not really compare. If you were curious, I also wanted to show it next to In a Galaxy Far, Far Away from the Star Wars collab. That's another blue, flaky, metallic bomb, but it's just overall a lot darker. I thought it was going to be closer to Wish I Hadn't Cried So Much from the Alice in Wonderland collab, but that one is a little too vibrant. Like, even though it's a light blue, it's not as muted. So I thought for a more muted base color, it might be more similar to Mooncat's Mercury in Retrograde, which is a magnetic, but it doesn't have any of these flakies. I actually am showing these unmagnetized because I feel like that's where they look the closest, but even still, they just do not compare, so I still wouldn't call them dupes. I was immediately reminded though of Beaux Rêves Were All Made of Stars, which was a previous polish pickup shade. This one virtually has the same kind of description, maybe with the exception of the flakies. They're just blue in the Beaux Rêves, but they're more multicolored and like rainbow looking in Mooncat. But even still, on the nail, I wouldn't call them exact dupes. I think Beaux Rêves is just a little bit lighter and more sheer. Next, for Banquet of Breadcrumbs, here it is next to Serpents of Eden, which is another bright shimmery green, but even though it kind of looks bright, it's actually a bit darker. It's just the shimmer that makes it look brighter. Here it is next to Plankton, also from the Mermaid Tales collection. That one's more of like a mid-tone green, so it's a little bit more of like a grassy shade, not as yellow. So I thought the closest in color was My Bugs from the Nightmare Before Christmas collab. They both have that same yellow green color scheme going on, but they look very different on the nail. My Bugs is like that typical shimmer crelly kind of finish, so it's a little bit more opaque and just more pigmented. A few other greens that I have to compare are Holo Taco's Peridon't Bother Me, which is actually closer to Serpents of Eden. It's just like a little bit lighter, but still too dark to match Banquet of Breadcrumbs. Here is Cirque Colors Tart, which is more of like a neon lime green that borders on being chartreuse, so definitely not a dupe. And here is ILNP's Willow from last year's spring collection. That one also has a similar yellow-green moment going on, but I think Willow is just a lot darker. And lastly, I wanted to see it next to Rogue's Mansfield Park because even though I knew it wasn't going to be an exact dupe because the base color is a little bit off, the shimmer in Rogue is pink instead of yellow, I wanted to see this because the Rogue is another chrome shimmer kind of formula, but as you can see, it's a little bit more heavy on the chrome side. Moving on to Castle of Cobwebs, I would say that the finish, being this glow-in-the-dark shimmer, is the most similar to Green-Eyed Monster, but it's not a dupe because that one is white with a green shimmer. So for some maybe closer options, here is Ghost of Hecate, which is a white jelly base with an intense cobalt blue shimmer, so that's actually not that close. Something a little bit closer is Head in the Clouds, which is kind of this off-white with like a touch of gray base color with a blue fine shimmer pigment. And here is Artemis Death Kiss, which is a bit more of a matching gray colored base, but this one has a purple shimmer instead of blue. I would say that the base color is definitely the closest to Castle of Cobwebs. It's just kind of hard to see because I feel like the purple shimmer is just so finely milled and densely packed that it just gives it this beautiful glow, but I still wouldn't call them dupes. I have a few more comparisons for this one. The first one here is Holo Taco's Pearl Gray from the David's Tea collab. That one just has a slightly lighter base color, but also a very different finish with all the glitters. And in case you were curious, here it is next to Holo Taco's Swan Song, which is the white-based jelly polish with a darker blue cobalt shimmer. And lastly, I actually wanted to see this next to Holo Taco's Sugar Rush, which I knew wasn't going to be a dupe because it also has a different colored shimmer, but I just thought in the bottle like they kind of had a similar like visual look to them, even though Mooncat does not have any holographic sparkle, but Holo Taco is much lighter anyway. Next, for Such Sweet Sorrow, here it is next to A Most Destructive Melody, which I thought was going to be more similar, but that one is just like way too dark and also very multi-chromatic. So to lighten it up a little bit, here it is next to Into the Wishing Well, but that one's more of like a periwinkle purpley base color with like an orangey copper shimmer and holographic sparkle, so also not really comparable. Here it is next to Glory of Innocence, which is more of a true purple base color with a blue shimmer and also intense hollow sparkle. So actually I thought the closest maybe was Mercury's Tears, even though in the bottle you can definitely tell that Mercury's Tears has like a brighter cobalt blue base. I knew that one was sheer, so on the nail I feel like they can kind of look similar, not exact dupes by any means. Like if anything, it only looks similar in like this very specific angle because Mercury's Tears is also more multi-chromatic with its shimmer, so it's just overall a lot more shifty than Such Sweet Sorrow, so I wouldn't call them dupes. For some other brand comparisons, here is Holo Taco's Camera Shy from the Declassified bundle this past winter. That one's more of like a muted gray with like a pink shimmer, so not really dupes. I actually think the closer shades were from ILNP. The first one here is Winter Dream from their first winter collection last year. That one looks like it matches the base color, but it doesn't have a pink shimmer. So for the pink shimmer, I thought of ILNP's Pool Party, which also has a very similar looking blue base color. So I definitely think that one is the closest to being a potential dupe to Such Sweet Sorrow. I can't really put my finger on why they're not exact dupes. Maybe ILNP is just a little bit more sheer, and in some angles the shimmer looks a little bit more red than pink, but they're definitely really close. And lastly, for Hall of Mirrors, here it is next to Moon Dust, which is their silver scattered holographic. That one is just way more dainty and not comparable at all. For an actual metallic flaky, here it is next to Fool's Gold, but that one is obviously more of like a yellowy gold and more matte looking than how shiny Hall of Mirrors is. Like I mentioned before, I wanted to compare it to other silver metallic flake toppers in my collection, so here it is next to Cracked Polishes with Sugar on top, which is from their holiday collection, but that one has a much smaller sort of particle size. And here it is next to Cirque Colors Silver Lining, which is just kind of your standard silver metallic topper. So that one is definitely the most similar to Hall of Mirrors. I have one coat of each here over my bare nail, so you can see. Again, Cracked is a little too dainty to compare, but Cirque definitely matches the kind of size and shape of the flakies in Hall of Mirrors, but there is a noticeable color difference. I feel like it was hard to see over my bare nail, so I did want to do one coat of each of these over black, so you can hopefully see that Cirque's is more of that silvery white color. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons for Mooncat's Baroquen collection. As always, I can't wait to hear what you think of this release, because I really hate to say it, but I'm just not in love with these. It pains me so much to say that, because don't get me wrong, like, I love the concept of these, the vibe, the theme of the collection is so beautiful, so up my alley. Even though I only just started watching it, it's very much giving Bridgerton vibes, which, you know, so beautiful, but just individually as the polishes, I'm not the biggest fan of them. There's something about this specific shimmer type of finish that it just doesn't really do it for me for some reason, and I don't know why, because I know that I have talked about some wet looking shimmers before and really liking them, so maybe I just have to be like in the right mood for them or something. So yeah, unfortunately, once I tried them on myself, I feel like they just didn't really impress me so much. I felt a little bit underwhelmed, and it just sucks to see, because, you know, I'm usually a big fan of Mooncat collections. I love their themes, but there's something about like the majority of these finishes that just aren't for me. And you know, that's obviously totally okay. Just to be fully clear, this is just my personal preference. There is nothing wrong with the polishes. They're still fantastic quality. So, you know, I don't mean to rain on anybody's parade or anything, but unfortunately, I'm just not the biggest fan, and it just sucks to say, because I feel like these would have been like an easy win for me. So let me know if you did pick these up already. Let me know what your favorites are, or if you happen to feel the same way that I do. I cannot wait to chat about that in the comments down below. But anyway, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope that you liked the video, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!